Okay, let's start. Hello, everybody. Welcome to this new GGP-Connect webinar of the year. I'm joined by our new team member, Lynn Rouvois, who is the new Dissemination and Communication Officer in the GGP team. I'm myself, Anne Gauthier. I'm the Director of the GGP, the Generation and Gender Program. And we're joined also by two of our French colleagues, Laurent Toulemon and Milan Bouchet-Valat. Both of them are located at INED, the French Demographic Institute. And basically, most of you know the format. These GGP webinars are a means of allowing the national teams involved in data collection to share their experience, share some insights as to the data collection and the data quality. We're going to give them about 20-30 minutes for their presentation. It's going to be followed by questions from the audience. But if you want, don't hesitate to use the Q&A function to post your question as we go along. So without further ado, I pass the microphone, so to speak, to Laurent, who I believe will be the one starting the presentation.
Hello, Anne. Hello, everybody. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to present our the first result of our pilot. So this is a common work with Milan Bouchet-Valat, but also with people in our data collection department, survey department, Marine Bondon, Ruxandra Breda-Popa, Paul Cochet, Géraldine Schwartz, and Effie Marcoux. So,
the sound isn't very good, Laurent.
Yeah, your sound is not very good.
My sound is not good? So let me check. I made an effort to have a new...
Or lower it a bit, perhaps.
No, maybe...
No, we don't hear anything now.
Like that, is it good?
Maybe.
Like that, it should be good? No? Shall I put it closer to my...
No, maybe further.
A bit further, I think.
Further?
Yeah.
Like that?
Yeah, yes.
Okay, thank you very much. It's okay like that? Okay, so let me start. On the pilot, we had a couple of questions. We wanted to check the CAWI mode of data collection and CATI mode by telephone, which is the one we often do in France. And we wanted also to check the incentives as in other countries. And we made something a little different. We introduced a switching from one mode to the next after 1.5 months in order to give the opportunity to people who did not participate through one mode to go through the other mode. So I will present some first results on the response rate, and then Milan will go a little more in detail on the questions related to the questionnaire. So in France, we have a list of inhabitants. It's a list of households for tax, income tax data. So we have the address, the name, and a telephone or a mail number. So this allows us to contact the household. We made a selection of individuals. So the individuals may be the reference person or not. So it makes a sort of complication in the contact with the people. And then we had more than 80% of households with at least one mail and around 79% of households with a telephone number. So we could enrich this list of telephone through the dial directory. So very quickly, we had a number of scenarios. On the A scenarios are through CATI, the telephone, and the B scenarios are through CAWI, through internet. And we have pre-incentive, post-incentive, and we have a scenario with both pre and post incentives. And then after 1.5 months, we switched. So those who were asked to answer by telephone, they have the opportunity, they receive a mail and they have the opportunity to answer by internet. And those who are asked to answer by internet, after 1 month and a half, they are contacted by telephone and they are offered to answer by telephone or by internet. So we have basically 250 people in each scenario, a little more for the Kawi, it's 300. And then we have this BO scenario with a large sample, 1,000 people, for which we will not make a switching. So it's the sort of low-cost scenario with internet only. So we had a website. We could send information letter to the people participating in the survey, hope to the addresses we had. And then people could connect to the server. And then those who were to be interviewed by telephone, they could take an appointment. And those who were supposed to answer by internet, they just had their code to connect to the Niji server. So this is basically the main result. So on the left, we have the telephone. The dark bar is 26%. So before switching, we have only one respondent out of 4 which answered. And basically, incentives does not make any difference. Through Kawi, the response rate is around 10%. So it's a very low response rate, but it's very similar than in other countries. And with the incentives, we can increase the response rate up to 20% if we have both pre and post incentives. And for the telephone, to be honest, we can say that the response rates could be considered as something like 35% if we put out all the false numbers, numbers who were not leading to a concrete individual. So this is for the response rate. So when we look at some significance, we see that there is no significant difference. The incentives do not make any difference by telephone. And incentives make a difference through the internet. And the best situation is when we have pre and post incentive, but due to the sample size, we cannot say at the level of 5% that it is better to have pre and post incentive both compared to pre or post, which are very similar. But let's say on a one side 10% level test, it is better to have pre and post incentives. Now, you see that in both data collection mode, we had, so here we had some holidays, so the response rate are raising at the beginning, and then they are, the rate of increase is not so dramatically increasing after our reminders, be it by telephone or by internet. Sorry. So when we look at subgroups of population, we can see that women answer a little better than men, but the difference is not significant and not so large. We can see that people of middle age, let's say between 30 and 50, answer better than the young adults or the older adults, more than 60. And this is even more true by telephone than by internet. Then when we look at the household composition, we see that it's mainly households with couple and children where the response rates are the higher compared to people living alone and or to single parents. And through Kawi, we also have this higher answer, especially women answer better by internet, but again, due to the sample size, it's not really significant. When we look at the household standard of living, we have a clear increase by standard of living. And this is true again by telephone. These are the blue curve, as well as by internet. And finally, the main proxy for the probability to answer is whether we have a convenient information on the individuals. So when we have the respondent number by telephone, it's much better than when we have the telephone of another person. And of course, it's even much worse when we didn't have a telephone number at the beginning. And through internet, we have the same thing. The results are steeper when we look at the occurrence of an email, but getting a direct contact to the individual is really something very important for this survey. So this is for the presence of an email. You see that there is still a difference by telephone, but the difference is much larger through the internet. So it's really very important to get, as far as we can, prior information on the respondents to contact them. So now I give the floor to Milan for the rest of the presentation. So Milan, I go on sharing my screen and I will go from one slide to the next, or I stop sharing my screen?
Yeah, go on sharing.
Okay.
So hello, everybody. So we perform some multivariate analysis based on the different factors that Laurent just presented, so using a logistic regression. And what we can say is that the main effects are robust. So the sample size is relatively small, so we cannot confirm everything, but we still see, for example, that the response rate is lower for poor households. And this is similar for Kawi and Kati. What is very interesting is that we see that the lower response rates of the young adults is due to the fact that we don't have their email or telephone number. So it disappears once we control for the presence of the contact information. And so this may be because we cannot contact them easily, because they live in a different household than the parent or home. So we call the parents, but we cannot reach the child in this household. So we need to get the telephone number of the child, which isn't always very easy. So next slide. So the main differences between scenarios, Laurent said a few results. And so we have very limited or no effect of incentives in Kati. What we see that in Kati, the pre plus post scenarios, so the one with the highest incentives, is more efficient at the beginning, so we get faster answers from respondents, but progressively the difference disappears. And in the end, the response rates are not different between the Kati scenarios as Laurent showed. But the difference persists in Kawi, so incentives are useful mainly in Kawi. What's also interesting is that we can notice that some underrepresented groups reply more when we give pre plus post incentives in Kawi. So this reduces the non-response bias, which is a main goal of increasing response rates. So this is the case for young people below 30 years and for children of the reference person, which are the most difficult to contact. And likewise for persons for who we don't have the email or the telephone number, giving incentives increases their response rate. So it could be that it makes it easier to get the contact of that person because you feel kind of forced to give the information because the person can win 10 euros thanks to this. That might be an explanation. So now turning to the questions about the issue we faced with the questionnaire and the dropouts. So in Kati, we had very few dropouts, only 5%. In Kawi, it was about 1/3 of dropouts, so it is much more significant. But since we switched to Kati in the second phase of the survey, we hope to finish many interviews that people stopped in the middle. So we'll see the results in a few coming weeks. When looking across the questionnaire, we see that dropouts are quite evenly spread. And so in Kawi, to concentrate on this mode, we see that we lose 13% of respondents at the end of the module 1, 20% at the end of module 2, so in cumulative. So you see the figure here. And then you can see that the rate of dropout slows down, but it remains relatively high and somewhat constant. So there's no clear place where we lose respondents. So coming to questionnaire issues, we did a lot of listening of Kati interviews, which was very interesting to understand what was working and what wasn't. We also listen to comments by Cathy interviewees, and we will be able to see the comments that people wrote in Kawi, but this will be for later. So maybe the main results of the test is that interviews are too long. They last a bit more than 1 hour. But this is not completely unexpected because we kept all the optional modules of the GGP. So we took the longest form of the questionnaire, and we could cut many questions which are recommended to be removed. So to detail a few issues we observed, some questions were complicated or a bit difficult. So many were time consuming because they need some memory. You can have some doubts, or categories are too close. So this is the case for dates, where often respondents needed to compute the dates. So it could be useful to offer either to give an age or to give the year to avoid the interviewers from doing the computation manually. Occupation is also takes some time to declare. We have a very detailed list which worked well, but sometimes you have too much detail. So this is a French list. Income was also difficult to collect because we have some definition issues about how many times in the year, whether it was the respondent's income, the household income, different kinds of income, whether it should include taxes and different kinds of taxes in France. Another kind of issues were about the series of questions which are repeated, but sometimes split across different pages. So it could be useful to present a table or to repeat the introduction on each page, or to avoid splitting the questions. And finally, the questions on opinions, which are often optional, so probably we won't keep everything. They were a bit tiring for respondents after 1 hour because they are very recurring. Another set of issues is about the missing filters. So we noticed many questions are asked even when we know they don't apply to the respondent. For example, we had a bug, probably we need to investigate this, but probably it's a technical bug, which means that we ask the questions about the intention to have a child, even to all the respondents or to adults without a partner, which isn't supposed to happen. And also the questions about the impact of having a child can be tiring for respondents who said they didn't want a child. But this one is also an optional block, I think. We have questions about parents, even when respondents said they don't know anything about the parents. And we have a few questions on work, which are asked to self-employed people, to those who never worked, or those on long-term leave, and this could maybe be filtered to make the questionnaire nicer. Some questions could be made more specific. For example, the French translation for the question about whether you're in a couple isn't very clear, and we should clarify that we only mean cohabiting couples. So this was a difficult point for interviewers. We should better define what is being employed or what is being on leave, maybe with a minimal duration. In many cases, when we say you, it's not clear whether it's a singular or plural, so whether it's only the respondent or the full household. And finally, for some measures, we could improve the situation. For example, by adding missing answer options, like saying less than once a year for the contact with children. Or some inconsistencies, for example, in the translation of some questions, we had to use negatives because it sounded better in French, but actually it's confusing because you need to say yes to a question which says no, so it's not clear whether you agree or you disagree. And this is the same issue for scales, which are not always in the most natural direction. So let me finish with some preliminary results about what happened after we switched modes, so just at the beginning of January. So here is the new and updated version of the response rates by scenario. So the bottom bars are what happened before January, so using a single mode, and then the bars at the top are what happened after. So on the left, this is the switch to carry, and on the right, for the scenarios B, this is the switch to CATI, plus the fact that some respondents could decide to answer by internet even since January. They have the choice between internet and telephone. So overall, we see we increase the response rates by about 4%, which is quite nice. So especially in the CATI, in the scenarios which started in CATI, the A scenarios on the left, offering the carry mode, which isn't very expensive, increases the response rate. And of course, for the scenarios B on the right, calling the respondents on the non-respondents increases the response rate, and this is more expected. Something interesting also is that in the B0 scenario, which is the one with carry only, just sending a postal reminder increased the response rate by 3%. So this is very cheap and seems interesting to do. So this is the same picture, but in with the time trends. So what you can see is that after the gray vertical bar, this is the switch at the beginning of January. So you see the rapid increase in response rates, and this continues. So we expect maybe to get more replies in the coming months. So to conclude, something we haven't mentioned yet is that we had a programming bug on our side with the polling institute who did the survey work. And it appears that it was impossible to reuse the links we sent to the questionnaire to start completing a questionnaire you had started to answer. So you could start in the middle of the questionnaire, you could decide to stop and to continue later, but actually it didn't work as we advertised it. So we are still investigating this problem, but it could explain a proportion of the incomplete questionnaires in carry. What we can see is that it's very efficient to start with carry interviews and switch to CATI to complete the questionnaires. It could be an efficient and relatively cheap strategy. When we compare the costs of each scenario, something which is not completely intuitive is interesting to note is that the B2 scenario, which is carry with only pre-incentives, so €5 before you answer the questionnaire, is actually quite expensive because we pay the €5 to everybody, even those who don't answer. So in the end, the cost is relatively high per field questionnaire. But the B4 scenario, which is €5 pre and €10 post, is actually less expensive per field questionnaire because it has a higher response rate. And so it could be interesting to do a mix of B4, which works relatively well and is not very expensive, and maybe with some A1, which is only CATI, without incentives, to be able to compare the mode effects, but still get relatively high response rates without spending too much money on the data collection. But the pilot is still in the field, so these are only preliminary results for now. And finally, so the final survey is planned for the autumn 2023. The idea was to use the same design as the most efficient tested scenarios, as I said, so maybe a combination of different scenarios, depending on the final results of the pilot. Our target is 10,000 respondents, aged 18 to 79 for the first wave. And one peculiarity of this French survey will be that it will be paired with the family and employers survey, which is a a survey carried out by INED, which targets 25,000 respondents, so an even larger sample than GGP, which is coupled with a sample of employees. And this survey will include about 3/4 of the GGS questions, more or less. So this should allow analysis on a very large sample for a subset of questions of GGS. So that's all. Thanks for your attention. And if you have any questions, don't hesitate.
Thank you very much, Laurent and Milan, for that. It's particularly interesting for the GGP as a project because it's the first country or the first pilot where there's a CATI telephone element, and it's certainly the first one also where a switch is possible. So this is really really interesting for us. But to the audience, it's now time for you to ask questions. You have two ways of doing that. You can type them in the Q&A, or you can raise your hand and we allow you to ask your question. But we already have some questions that Laurent is answering right now about the contact, how the respondents were contacted and how many contact attempts. There was a question by Artleaf Brewer. Laurent, do you want, instead of typing, do you want to answer the question?
Yes, I can do that. So Art is asking how we contacted the respondents. So as we had their postal address, we sent them a letter announcing the survey and telling them that they were encouraged to answer through the internet for those who were for the CAWI, or that they will be contacted to answer by telephone for those who were in the CAT scenario. And then there were a series of reminders by SMS or mail. So there were basically, I think, 3 reminders during the first month and a half. And then after 1 month and a half, everybody received, all those who did not answer or did not complete the questionnaire received a new letter telling them that they were to be recontacted by telephone, or that they were encouraged to answer by CAWI. So does that answer Art's question? I think so. Anyway, we will share the PowerPoint, and we will have, of course, a report of the pilot in some weeks. But the fieldwork is not ended. It will, after the switching, we will go on up to the mid-February.
Thanks, Laurent. Question probably to Milan, this time from Brianna in Southampton, asking about how much did the CATI cost when taking into account interviewer costs? Did it still end up being cheaper than CAWI with pre and post incentives? Which is particularly interesting.
No, definitely, it's like the Uberization of the society. It's much cheaper to ask the interviewees to be also interviewers. And even with the incentive, the cost of a field questionnaire is around 35 euro. So it's a little complicated. We only give 10 euro post incentive, but the 5 pre-incentive is given to all the sample. As Milan said, it's much more than 5 euro as a mean per field questionnaire. But so basically the mean cost is around 35 euros, while the mean cost by telephone using a firm doing that is closer to 100 euros in France. So it's much cheaper through the internet, but we are investigating the possibility, as Milan said, to finish some questionnaires after dropout. So some were began by internet and not finished could be completed by telephone. That could be a possibility. So of course, to analyze the switching and the mode effect, it's a little complicated because we will have some interviews started on the internet and ended by telephone. But it's better than to have incomplete questionnaires. But the takeaway message is that it's much cheaper through the internet, and we will likely have a large sample through the internet, but a small sample by telephone to be able to look at some mode effects and compare with other surveys.
Thanks, Laurent. There's a question from Martin Credo from the Czech Republic. It's a clarification. So do we understand well that at the beginning people were assigned to either CATI or CAWI, or is it that on the spot when the very first attempt of contact, they could already switch at that point? They would say, actually, I would prefer CAWI or I would prefer CATI, or did you allow this switch only later on, like you explained?
No, we played it Frenchly. We did not allow anything. We said that the interviewers were having one scenario, and after the switch, they were moving to the other mode. It's only the case that those who started with CAWI, when they switched to CATI, they were able, because we did not close this possibility, they were able to reconnect to the NIDI server to finish their questionnaire by CAWI. But thank you for the question, because it's definitely something we could have tried, and that could be a possibility for the future to allow the people to answer by one way or the other. So for instance, we could say that among the CATI sample, we could say, if you want to fill the questionnaire by internet, you can do it. That would be maybe cheaper to allow some people to answer by internet, because as Milan said, after the switching, we had a non-negligible proportion of people who did not answer through telephone, but they filled the questionnaire on internet. So for now it is 4%, but it's likely to be a little more at the end of the pilot.
There's just maybe a risk of allowing people that we call in CATI to say, I will answer on the internet, is that maybe they will say, yeah, I will answer on internet, but they won't do it, and you need to call them again. So we decided that once we had somebody on the telephone, we tried as much as possible to get them to fill the questionnaire.
Mm-hmm. There's another question. The switch obviously have raised a lot of attention. There's a question from Norbert from Vienna, asking how far when they're going from CAWI to CATI in the switch, when you allow the switch, how far had they gone in the questionnaire at that point? Are you talking about people who basically had not started at all the questionnaire and suddenly you got them over in CATI? Or is it that indeed they had completed the first part or second part of the questionnaire and then you completed to CATI? Can you clarify a bit what that switch involved here?
No, it's too early. We did not do that because almost all results we presented you were from a data file we got before the switching. So we are going to examine that in detail. Those dropouts, when did they take place? As Milan said, most of them took place at the beginning of the questionnaire after section 1 or 2, but there were dropouts at all times, and we will see which questionnaires were more likely to be completed. But there were also people, maybe they just opened the CAWI, did not answer more than one question, and then it's interrupted. We don't know. And there can also be some who finished completely the questionnaire, but they just forgot to click on complete. So it's still an open question, but that's a teaser for the next step.
But not that nobody decided that they would switch from CAWI to CATI. Actually, they weren't aware at all that we would switch to CATI. So when they dropped, for them, they just assumed nothing would happen.
Okay, yeah. I see a question from At, and I'm going to allow him to talk. At, all yours.
Thank you, Anne, and thank you both Milan and Laurent for your interesting presentation. It's great to see that the work is continuing in France. I have a question on the dropout. It's clear that the dropout rate among those who are in the CAWI mode is considerable. If I collect it rightly, is more than 1 out of 3 who drop out. I'm curious whether this is true as well for those people who have a post incentive, so who have a conditional incentive, So they will only get the incentive if they have finished the interview. I could imagine that this works really well in decreasing the dropout of those who start. Do you have any information on this?
Yeah, so you're right. I can look at the figures, but yeah, the incomplete rate was much lower when there's a conditional incentive. I think when you add a pre-incentive, the incomplete rate goes up. So the total response rate goes up, but in particular the incomplete response rate. When you add only the conditional incentive, then the complete rate goes up. And when you have both, you have kind of both. So if you have a much higher overall response rate, but also more incomplete questionnaires. But as I said, we had this bug where for some respondents, the website didn't work when they tried to complete the questionnaire. So it's hard to say whether this was really dropout or just a bug. So we need to investigate this. And by shortening the questionnaire, it should be also better.
There are a few additional questions in the Q&A, and there's one question from Eleonara Meili, and you refer in your presentation, and I'm not sure if Laurent or Milan, to the fact that there was some hesitation of people about their age or the specific date. Can you provide a bit of clarification here? Was it in the life history section, I guess, where there's a lot of question asked about first marriage, the precise date of the birth of the children? Where was most of the problem?
I don't remember exactly, but yeah, it's about the partners, the parents, the different life events. So often people find the information, but it takes some time. Sometimes they laugh when they hear the question, and in the end they find the information. But so in many cases, we realized that the interviewer had to say, can you remember the age? And then he computed the year directly. So if the questionnaire was able to do that automatically, it could be better.
There's a question from Joy Cruz from all the way from Hong Kong, asking about the occupation categories that you also said that you had a French list, a very long list, and it did work, but it was sometimes long to find, I guess, the actual occupation category. So would you recommend instead, the question is, would you recommend a simplified version of the occupation category? What would be your recommendation?
So we used a new system of collecting the occupation, which is the new standard by the French Statistical Office. So it was a result of a long work of improving the classification, the socioeconomic classification. So that's a very detailed list based on what people spontaneously declare in censuses. And we have several thousand occupational titles. So the advantage is that you can type almost any occupation and you find it. So it's very precise and it works quite well for many people. But sometimes it's more for CATI interviewers. The issue is that sometimes they type a few words and they have 5 choices of very detailed sub-occupations. And sometimes they waste a bit of time choosing between these, which often doesn't have any consequence on the classification, except maybe at the most detailed level of the 4-digit score or something. So I think it works relatively well, and it's standard to code the occupation in France, but maybe we should have trained the interviewers a bit more to explain them when it matters and when they can just go ahead. But overall, using something very detailed seems to work relatively well.
Thanks. Another question from Brianna in the Q&A. So both in the CATI and CAWI, you found that people with low income and young people have typically lower response rates. Is there anything we could try to do to increase these response rate for these specific groups?
Maybe, well, the bad surprise was that this income effect that we expected for the Kawi mod was also present on CATI. And incentives do not seem to make any difference. So we don't have any solution. But in some cases, incentives are not only increasing the response rates, but also decreasing the differentials in response rates, so diminishing the response bias. So it's not true for the standard of living, but it is true especially for the young adults. And no, we do not have, maybe we could make an effort to contact some people who are not very fluent in French. That's a possibility, but it's a small, very small number of people in our pilot. So it's complicated because these people can be more difficult to reach for very many different reasons. So we don't have a solution, and we were hoping that the income differences would be lower through telephone, but in France it is not the case for the pilot.
And yeah, it's a bit disappointing that incentives don't have a larger effect for the progress. That was one of the hopes, and it doesn't work.
Let's see, I don't see any question in the chat. Anybody wants to raise their hand in the audience for a last, that's your last chance of asking a question? No, if not, we're exactly on time. So before I thank our participants, let me say that we will keep the Zoom online now. So if you have a burning question or you would like to interact with the speakers, stay on the line after I formally close. We'll leave it on for about 10 minutes or so. But on that, I want to really thank Laurent and Milan for this really insightful presentation. Attracted a lot of interest, and we'll be really interested to hear whatever short report you can produce on the results of your pilot and on the switching that, as you said, you're still in the field, and it could be that response or even a bit slightly different. On that, I'd like to thank everybody for attending, being numerous. Join us in a month from now for the next GGP webinar. Bye-bye. And Laurent and Milan, stay on the line, please. Bye, everybody.
Thank you for listening. Bye-bye.